Last year, I expressed a very hefty amount of anguish at the fact that Hasbro Marvel Legends was going to be bundling the Toby, Tom, and Andrew Peter Parker slash Spideys from No Way Home in a triple pack exclusive to Hasbro Pulse. And you're not even getting any alternate heads, you're just getting the extra hands. So now, fast forward almost a year, and the long rumored individual releases with those alternate heads have finally been released at $25 a pop, so you're saving roughly about 15 bucks by going this method. Was it worth it? Well, maybe in another universe. And it's painful to really witness something like this happening, because these are in fact my boys. These are the sole reasons for why I was holding on buying any more Marvel Legends, even with some of those retro cards that have been released, like the Tarantula, the Rose, all those, like the new style of Daredevils that were coming out that were looking kind of neat. And then after a while, even the Ben Reilly, and I was just like, yeah, but for 25 bucks and you're just getting an extra hands and that's it, no other accessories, it looks like the same kind of bugs, same kind of quality, whatever. It was finally this No Way Home release that I kind of pulled myself out of Marvel Legends retirement to finally tackle these. So I wanted exactly to take a look if maybe waiting on that 3-pack, which I stood my ground and said I wasn't gonna buy, especially if the rumors were circling that we were gonna get separate releases with those alternate heads. And now here we are, even though in the end, like Linkin Park said, it doesn't even matter. Let me show you exactly why. Let's start with my man Toby, because arguably he was amongst the three that I was probably the most excited to finally own in a much more contemporary form of Marvel Legends, outstanding the Toy Biz era, which is mainly where Toby was getting his figures back in 2002 and 2004 respectively. It was finally in 2006ish, 2007ish when Hasbro took over and decided to shrink it all down with those Spider-Man 3 figures. I actually have already covered those specific figures on this channel, so you guys can go and check them out. And who knows, maybe later down the line I'll make a full-blown comparison, but not before I get some hefty boys in here to then tackle the retrospective kind of look at these versions of the character and which one's really worth your metal, or rather your money. Here, at the much more consumer-friendly approach, you have the Marvel Legends $25 No Way Home Toby, where you have the webbed suit, as it's being called, being the, or as they are actually calling it on the packaging, the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, as that's the official moniker for the Toby version. And you can see that for the most part, they actually got the Raimi suit down pat. It's mostly kind of modeled after the Spider-Man 2 version, where you have the much more open front legs of the spider here on the back. But as far as the actual color shading, the blue, the red, and then of course the silver patterning on the webbed, or rather the, I guess you could say the matted black, officially it's not silver, but it kind of has like a silver effect in the lighting. So officially not silver, it's technically black, but it has this semi-reflective sheen to the actual puff painting that was happening on that originally designed Raimi suit, that whenever he's kind of in the light, it just shines on, regardless of which movie he shows up in. And so almost every version of the figure, whether it be in the 6-inch scale like this, or even in the 6th scale version like Hot Toys, they always manage to find a way to replicate that texture. And so when it comes to this format, they're always going to be able to paint in some of those silver lining details on the web. And for the most part, it works out fairly well across the chest, across the arms, and even a few of the boots. Where it didn't really work on the Marvel Legends here would have to be the mask. Not only do you have some faded little linings of the paint itself, but you even have, frankly, just some slight deformity happening with the mask. I'll just be brutally honest, I don't know what it is, but there's something really off looking about the mask that it looks like it's kind of bulging from his right side, like he's just kind of deformed, like, I'm blanking on his name, but what's his face from the Goonies is under the mask, or rather, I think I may have mentioned this before. I can't remember if it was in my short for the Marvel Legends 3-pack or what, when it was first announced, but there's something about the look of this mask that looks like they took the mask from when he's hanging upside down, planting a kiss on Gwen Stacy in Spider-Man 3, that people have now memed to death because of how disproportionate it is for the stunt actor to be able to be hanging upside down and deliver that kiss and actually pull down the mask. So it looks like they replicated that version of the mask, and something is just too circular about his egghead shape here that is just off. Even when pulling it out of the box and noticing it as its own separate piece, because he comes off by default. It comes separately. I'm looking at it, I'm like, what is it about the bulge on the right side that is just so off to me? Which is a shame because the actual shaping, paint applications, and overall look of the lenses are pretty accurate. It's just where they're placed on the mask that is just completely off. It makes me think, is there somebody out there doing custom jobs on these heads that I can maybe swap out? Apart from that, they did a pretty serviceable job of replicating Tobey's suit and even most of his proportions. The only areas that I think kind of stand out a little bit to me is that his shoes are just a little bit on the big side. There's just something about the feet that are just a little oversized. Granted, that could serve as a form of compliment to Tobey. That's probably why he was probably able to keep MJ even in his 40s, as he mentioned at the end of No Way Home. And then also, what is going on here on the shoulders? There's something about the way they molded this area right here that is just a little too highly lifted. And there's something else going on with the neck that I'll comment on a little later on once we get to some of the accessories. But outside of that, I would say that this is probably the midway point of the 3-pack, or amongst the 3 Spideys here, where you have some really good solid detail and paint application happening with the overall body that I look at it and go, yeah, you know what, this is actually a pretty serviceable Tobey, minus a couple of discrepancies in terms of proportioning. You can maybe argue that the thighs are just a little bit on the big side, but again, what I think is kind of interesting and pretty accurate, technically speaking, to No Way Home is that they're replicating his body proportions in that movie as an older Peter Parker as opposed to how he was in 2002. So for the most part, I would say this is actually not too bad of a look for my man Tobey. So imagine my genuine surprise when I noticed that they, in my opinion, completely f***ed up the Tom Holland version here in the middle. And there is a bit of an asterisk to that because we technically got the Tom Holland version already, I want to say twice, as a singular release and then tossed in to that Hasbro Pulse exclusive 3-pack. However, the major change this time around, for those of you who have not been keeping up, is that this time he does not have the integrated suit from the final battle. This time in this individual release, we get our first Marvel Legends 6-inch final swing or final scene suit from No Way Home, specifically the red and blue suit that is kind of more on the classically designed archetypal version of Spidey, except with a couple of cosmetic touches that Tom Holland's Peter Parker decided to implement after his experiences with the Andrew and Tobey Peters. So here's the thing, a lot of people really like this suit. I'm kind of half and half on the overall design of the suit. I love the shade of red, love the spider symbol on the chest and on the back, the way that it's designed, the way that it pretty much melts pretty much all 3 of the Spideys together to form a brand new symbol. And it still feels original while at the same time paying homage. What I'm not crazy about is the actual reflectiveness of the blue. The actual shade and hue of the blue that they chose to pair up with the red is actually pretty cool. I just don't like the reflectiveness of it that we did witness for a glimpse in that final swing scene at the end of No Way Home. Which to me is quite funny considering that so many people were coming to the chagrin of the Green Goblin suit back in 2002 for looking a little too Power Rangery, and yet I haven't heard a single peep about Tom Holland's blue on his brand new suit. So I don't know, just saying, raising an eyebrow a little bit there. With that in mind though, they did a serviceable job of replicating that here in 6-inch form, minus to me some really ugly factors that, in my opinion, make Tom Holland here, this specific version, the embodiment as to why I believe that the No Way Home wave was rushed. Not just the 3 Spideys, but the Matt, the MJ, the Sandman, and even the Green Goblin. If we take a closer look, you'll notice that my unit here, amongst others that have then reported on Reddit, have a number of cosmetic QC problems. You have some smudging happening here on the right thigh, where you have some paints just kind of splotching all over the place. There's some quality to the plastic and quality to the paint again that just feels kind of like it was just pumped out, like they maybe increased the speed of their printers or something was happening there. You have some separation of the plastic between the red boot and the blue leg here on his left. You have a little bit of like red kind of tearing, almost like where the plastic pieces separate from the assembly line, happening here on one of his latimus dorsi on his left. And while we're on this left side, you look a little closer on his bicep on the left, and you'll notice that the red paint is off pattern to the lining of the webbing. So just so many cosmetic little discrepancies and things that just makes me think like, okay, this almost feels like a bootleg, and if I didn't know any better from pulling it out of the legitimate Marvel Legends Hasbro box, I wouldn't have known better, quite frankly. And then we get to that head. That head. I'm sorry, but this thing is just way too egg-shaped, especially when you turn it to its side. You'll see just how high that head really elevates to the point where this thing is just downright ugly, which is a shame because I actually really do like the classic look of the mask itself as far as the webbing, the choice for the lenses, which speaks more so to the design that we saw at the end of No Way Home. But in terms of toy form here, something about it is just completely off, which is a shame, like I said, because there's some areas of the suit that I really do like, specifically that symbol, but overall, there's just something kind of ugly feeling about it. And trust me, things are going to get a little bit more heinous when it comes to articulation. But before we get to that, I'm going to talk about probably the biggest surprise out of the three here, which is going to be Andrew. Despite the little bit of credit I was giving the Tobey figure, in all honesty, Andrew here is amongst my favorite out of the three. I would say, as far as ranking, Tom is obviously the worst. Tobey right down in the middle, and then ranking at number one would probably have to be Andrew, because despite the slight lankiness to the neck proportions to the head, especially popping the mask head on, it just looked a little too bulbous from the top there. The proportions are frankly quite right for the remainder of the body. The texture work, sure, I could probably have used a little bit of extra, I guess you could say, saturation on the color scheming, but overall, it's a really solid Marvel Legends with very few QC issues. If anything, I'll probably just notice that if you look a little closely, and I feel like a lot of other figures have had this as well, so it's probably maybe a design thing, but if you look inside of his little rib area here amongst the little divots that form his ribs, you see a little bit of the red coming through from the plastic, so you can kind of tell that they painted on the blue on top of the surface. But at least for the remainder of the blue pattern, as well as the texture work, it's pretty solid, pretty consistent, and then the web patterns amongst the boots, the belts, the chest, and even the back symbols where you have an awful lot of that Amazing Spider-Man classic look is still well replicated here, especially since over the past almost 10 years, we have now come around on this suit. A lot of people thoroughly believe that this is probably the best live-action interpretation of the Spider-Man suit, and it's very hard to argue. I would have to really marinate and think about what my favorite live-action suit is, but there's no denying that the Amazing Spider-Man 2 suit is amongst the very best, and I feel like credit where credit is due. Like I said before, Marvel Legends really nailed it with this figure. Granted, they have done Marvel Legends on this specific suit before, so all they really had to do is go back to that blueprint and make sure that they were able to hone in an awful lot of things that worked on that one and bring it home here. So overall, I would say, hey, if it ain't broke, don't have to necessarily fix it, at least not as badly as before. And unlike Tobey here, you have this little area with the shoulders where you can still mold it and flush it with the rest of the body that doesn't look too awkward like it did with Tobey. So at least you have so many different things here that feel like as the process went on, they fixed from the other two. And I can barely really think of any problems I have with the overall design of the suit. Again, saturation probably would have been a little increased on the color palette, but overall, this is one solid Marvel Legends that just spoke to me a little bit more highly than the other two. And if the detail, sculpt, and paint of the figure wasn't enough to make this stand out amongst my favorite of the three, then the articulation did so as well. Now, here's the thing. I'm not going to really want to repeat myself across the board because if you look a little carefully, you'll notice that all three of them have the exact same points of articulation. I didn't really see anything different at all. They pretty much all got modeled the exact same way. So you're going to have neck joints that can fully rotate 360 degrees. You're going to have the top arm joints that should be able to vertically rotate 360 and should be able to extend to the sides, left and right, perpendicular to form a T-pose. You even have the butterfly joints that you can clearly see amongst all three that should be able to move forwards and backs amongst the hinge inside there. Bicep joints that are fully able to rotate horizontally 360 degrees. Two elbow joints that are fully able to bend all the way up. Wrist joints that are separated from the rest of the hand that should rotate 360 degrees, as well as being able to bend at the hinge. And then the peculiar assembly of the torso, which allows a horizontal mid-torso cut that can turn slightly left and right, although it's rather tight amongst all three, not just on a couple of the other two aforementioned figures, but even on Andrew himself, that it feels a little resistant to the point where I'm actually kind of scared it might snap, especially when you kind of pop it back into place in a neutral position. Kind of makes like this clicking noise, so I don't really want to force it too badly. The mid-torso joint, however, can still flex towards the back pretty generously across all three and crunch slightly, but if you want to go even further with the crunching, you then have that reverse hinge joint towards the waist side of the joint of the figure itself. Then you get to the top leg joints that can't really flex towards the back because of the way that the ass is sculpted across all three, but you can definitely move the leg forward about that far, extend towards the sides, and as mentioned in my Green Goblin review, you have what a commenter mentioned is referred to as the drop down joint that can now flex the joint as well as the rest of the leg to go downwards and of course allow some more slack to extend the leg towards the sides and allow a slight bit of a split amongst there. Then of course you have the high thigh joints that can fully rotate 360 degrees, two joints at the knees that can fully bend all the way up, and sadly that ankle joint returns that can move downwards and upwards the foot and slightly pivot it side to side, can only rotate all the way around if you have the foot bent downwards. Of course, I feel like at this point there's no going away from this joint. Marvel Legends is going to keep this joint and it's going to be sticking around for a very long time. Now, the reason for why I wanted to tackle the articulation very quickly there, especially with my most favorite of the three, Andrew here, is because it's one thing to have a pretty solid quantity of articulation, especially with a character so agile and flexible and athletic and vertical as Spider-Man. And frankly, I feel like the actual amount of joints and where they place them on the body for this specific buck is cool. I actually really do dig that. I really don't dig that said quality of the joints feels gummy, feels sticky, and frankly, again, speaks to my theory that these things were rushed to meet the holidays. I feel like the original plan was to get this goddamn wave out sometime in January, preferably maybe even February, but somewhere up there in the higher up said, hey, we gotta get that Christmas money. It's gonna be a banger. Pump them out now. Click, 1.5x or 2x on that printing machine and get these things out. Because Andrew Garfield, I feel, was a bit of the lucky outlier amongst the quality of those joints. Because right out of the box, he worked. All joints here were pretty flexible, but also still pretty firm enough to not feel very loose. Everything was working pretty proportionally, and like I said, nothing felt like it was gonna snap off. Everything felt fluid. He felt like one of the more solidly built figures, which is pretty surprising because this is Andrew. He's not necessarily my favorite Spidey. These two, mainly Tom, remaining consistent with my ranking, Toby was amongst the middle of these two here because he did have a good joint on his head, on the arms, but the butterfly joint is quite frankly ass. It barely nudges, it barely even moves forward and back on either of his arms. And then in terms of extension towards the sides, it was a little bit on the sticky side. Both knees were completely stuck, and not so much, but a little bit of the thigh swivel were a little stuck. This one was actually pretty generous, but this one was so stiff that when turning it around, it actually did something. If you look a little closer amongst this B-roll that you're about to see, you'll notice that a little sliver, like half of a millimeter of plastic, got warped by just turning the joint. And then when it comes to Tom, man, Tom, you could almost forget about it. Almost every joint on this thing was stuck, except for maybe the head, the elbows. Actually, no, I take it back. One elbow joint out of each elbow was stuck. The other one was completely firm and almost felt like it was going to break. Both legs were stuck. Both knees were stuck. And ankles were still popping, right out of the box and working pretty favorably. Leg joints were actually still feel kind of rigid. You notice right there that they do like this little popping thing. They don't feel like they're working in your favor. And I would feel like out of the three of them, Tom was the one that was worrying me the most because it was Tom that I was seeing pop up on Reddit the most with people reporting broken joints, broken legs, arms, by simply just trying to flex him in a variety of positions. One of them, I was almost this close to breaking when trying to give him the arm extension because the right arm would extend no problem, even though it was a little bit on the tight side. This one was completely stuck. no movement whatsoever. And so that's where I almost brought myself at the risk of breaking the arm off at the bicep and completely screwing myself over. Now, David, you know what to do. Pass it with the hair dryer on high at high maximum settings for ultimate heat. Guess what? Everything that I just said, everything that I'm just complaining about, gonna give you a little Shyamalan twist here. That all this is after the heating from boiling water, from the hair dryer, everything. All right, a number of times. I've already done it like 2 or 3 times on each figure. And again, the only one that retained the flexibility on the joints was Andrew. Both of these, especially with admittedly the colder season that we are in, got back to being slightly stuck. Not as badly as they were right out of the box, but still with those extra little movements still stuck in place that I feel like it needs to be like a thing. Every time I want to make a new pose with one of these figures, bring out the hair dryer, give it a pass. I'm sorry, but that's bullshit. If I have to do that every single time that I want to put these things in a pose at the risk of possibly breaking, especially with how high in demand they are and very difficult to get, I don't want to live in that constant fear as a collector. What the hell, Marvel Legends? And again, this to me speaks, it was almost pretty transparent that this was just a rushed job. If they maybe have taken their time controlling some of the QC issues, apart from even the articulation, but even some of the splotchy paint stuff that was happening with this figure, which is technically the first time we get this specific version of Tom, then maybe we wouldn't have had that big of a problem. The quality on the articulation is so questionable that I had to rely on the elevated figure displays to help me out. Yes, a little bit of a shameless plug here, but I have to give them a quick shout out. They have been helping me in achieving some of these shots and some of these poses to be able to really hammer home across the point I'm trying to make on videos. So big kudos to them. Again, the link is going to be in the description as well as a pinned comment if you guys want to check them out. They have these hexagonal displays with the arms, the pegless displays where you could just slide in the feet and make it very seamless and very fluid, along with the elevated displays to kind of make things a little bit more dynamic and fierce. So again, check them out over at elevatedfiguredisplays.com, and if you guys want to pick anything up, use my promo code DarkSpiderDavid to get 10% off your order. Butterfly joints on Tom also kind of suck. I mean, actually the right one is pretty flexible, but the left one, once again, it just feels a little on the stiff side. But apart from articulation and again some of those QC problems, it still manages to get even worse. Something that we kind of already expected even when the pre-orders initially went up. You may have noticed that Tom is the only one with both fisted hands. The other two Spideys had been kind of screwed over a little bit as far as hand accessories once again. Maybe a little bit more generously than they were in that original 3-pack, but still not enough to really compensate the price point, especially for what you're really getting and the quality of it. So even though Tom is the one with the 2 fisted hands, he also comes with 2 web shooting hands as well as 2 open or wall crawling hands. So you have the 2 web shooting hands right there, and then the 2 wall crawling hands, equaling to a total of 6 hands, 3 pairs. With these 2 guys, both of them come with web shooting hands, appropriate to the stylings of the web on the suit itself. So of course you're going to have the reflective ones for Toby right there, and then the much more muted colored ones for Andrew right over here. Why is this a problem? Because Tom is the only one to come with completely symmetrical hands. With Toby and Andrew, what the hell's going on with this whole asymmetric thing where they only have 1 fisted hand on the right and then a gesturing hand on the left? You have kind of like this clenched, slightly wall crawling look. Maybe it's supposed to replicate the poster from the original 2002 movie on Toby here. And then you have kind of like this slightly reaching out, extending. Maybe he's reaching out for Gwen Stacy. Maybe that's what it's supposed to mimic. But you pretty much have that going on for the gesture on the left hand for Andrew that is not web spinning. If you wanted to have double fisted, or well, that sounded like a euphemism. But if you wanted anything else to resemble something that feels much more interactive, where you have both fist or both open or something like that, you're pretty much out of luck. Especially if you were going to do the sensical thing and pose all 3 of these Spideys pointing at each other. You do all this and you can't even throw in some pointing fingers? I'm sorry, but I'm going to bring them up again. I know that they're a topic for debate. But Ace Age Figure Arts tossed in pointing for Andrew and Toby. Even when Andrew didn't have the unmasked head because of licensing problems, they still threw in those pointing fingers. So you can still display all three Figure Arts Spideys from the ending of No Way Home with pointing fingers to mimic the meme. We all really want to do that. We're all eventually going to want to do that. And it's a very curated and respectful nod from that company to say, yeah, if we were, posing these figures and collecting them, we're going to want to do the iconic pointing Spidey meme. Apparently, that wasn't really in the cards or even in the mindset for Marvel Legends. What was in the cards after many, many, many months, almost a full-blown year of rumors, were going to be those unmasked heads. So you do have the alternate unmasked heads that pretty much said a big screw you to the people who did in fact buy that 3-pack that was a Hasbro Pulse exclusive. And there they are, all three, kind of like the Pep Boys right there in the middle there. But you can see that the likenesses are definitely there after much harrowing and hoop jumping that they managed to do, especially with Andrew, because he's the one with the really weird packaging that has the Amazing Spider-Man 2 logo and the art from that movie specifically, as opposed to anything that has to do with No Way Home. So I thought that was pretty weird. But if it means that we end up with arguably the best head sculpt, I'm sorry, but still maintaining consistency at the top of my ranking, the Andrew head sculpt, in my opinion, is probably the best. You could see right there that is legitimately a 6-inch Andrew. Well, pause. But you even have the coiffed up hair, the really great sculpting, and even the right hue for the brown of his hair, and even a little bit of the shading on his eyebrows. And just overall, as far as likenesses are concerned, they hit it out of the park. In my opinion, this is either a 9 or damn near a 10 out of 10 head sculpt, in my opinion. So kudos to Hasbro for doing that, in all fairness. So take a wild guess. Who's the worst? Yep, Tom Holland. Why? Because I frankly don't feel like that is Tom Holland. That feels like a baby version of Tom Holland, like the impossible Tom Holland, like when he was a kid. What is with this face? I don't know what it is, but I know it's supposed to resemble Tom Holland. There's a bit of a likeness. It just feels like a kid that they may have hired to go to Avengers Campus and portray Tom Holland's version of Spidey. I don't know, but there's just something that I just don't see Tom Holland in there. Something that's just putting me and separating me from the head sculpt itself. It's not badly painted or detailed, and they definitely got the right hairdo for him, as well as the actual shading of the brown, or almost like a blonde brown. But as far as likenesses are concerned, nah, that looks more like Jacob Tremblay than it does to Tom Holland. And frankly, when I say Jacob Tremblay, I don't mean Jacob Tremblay now, because I know that he had a bit of a growth spurt and he'd grown up. No, I'm talking like OG the Room movie Jacob Tremblay that he starred alongside Brie Larson, as in that screwed up scene from Dr. Sleep, Jacob Tremblay. That one, all right? That's pretty much how he looks like. So I don't know exactly what happened here, but that's pretty much what they ended up with as far as Tom Holland's likeness. And still remaining consistent with that ranking, right in the middle, is Tobey Maguire, because I definitely do see traces of Tobey Maguire's likeness there, except it's, in my opinion, I don't think it really looks like the old Tobey Maguire that we do get in No Way Home, but rather the slightly emo-ish Tobey from the middle of Spider-Man 3 specifically, except without the emo hair. It's much more combed like it was in the original movie. And then, of course, a few less wrinkles and aged looks to the overall face sculpt. But as far as painting and detail, it's actually pretty well done. I have heard some quote-unquote conspiracy theories that they did something to his face to where there's some units out there that look better than others. Like, this is probably one of the lesser better looking ones, but then there's some others out there that look a bit more solid as far as skin texture, paint applications that look a little bit more lifelike. So I don't know, your mileage may vary on the look of Tobey, but I personally feel pretty happy with what I got right here as far as emanating that friendly neighborhood Raimi Spider-Man. And overall, you could see right there that that's pretty much my ranking. Worst as far as overall value, the middle of the road, ranking at number 2, would have to be my man Tobey. But in a surprising twist, so far my favorite would have to be Andrew. Not only does he have the most solid Marvel Legends overall buck, overall articulation, working right out of the box without any need of extra help from me, but you also throw in a very, very great solid Andrew Garfield head sculpt. Yeah, it pretty much speaks for itself. I just wish swapping the head sculpts themselves was a bit less of a worrying process, because going back to what I was foreshadowing about that neck piece, you'll notice that all three of them have this kind of really small separation amongst the plastic around the base of the neck. Yeah, I don't know what that's about. I don't know if it's meant to release pressure, or what the actual secret function behind it is, but yeah, it delivers an insurmountable amount of anxiety for me whenever I try to swap out any of the head sculpts for all three. Whether it be Tom, Andrew, whatever. Every time I yank on this thing, I feel like, once again, I need to pull back that hair dryer, give it a brief pat so I can soften up the joint and soften up the hole holding the head itself, so I can then pull it out a little easier than before. But that's not without, like I said, tugging a little bit on this neck piece that creates this slight little separation in there. And man, oh man, it's rather nerve-wracking to see that thing could come apart at any second. On the bright side, swapping the hands are a little bit more favorable as far as just giving a quick tug, popping the other one in, and it's pretty much your standard hand replacement joint that Marvel Legends has been doing, and are frankly pretty good at. But all that it is to say that the wave itself also speaks for itself in just kind of demonstrating how money hungry Marvel Legends, and how much Marvel Legends is kind of losing a little bit of the plot. Because this was their opportunity to, in my opinion, bring me back into the fold of collecting some Marvel Legends, especially anything that has to do with Spider-Man themselves. Whether it be the versions from No Way Home, or any comic interpretation that I may have missed out on that I think looks pretty cool and get me indoctrinated into it, or frankly anything that's not Spider-Man related and I just kind of want to look at the figure and get myself back into the habit of collecting some of those classic characters that are outside of my purview of what I typically like to get. But this just really wasn't it, Chiefs. And it does hurt a little, because not only was I looking forward to these figures for quite some time, especially after passing up on that 3-pack, but seeing them here with the unmasked head sculpts together, yeah, it's kind of bringing me back to that seminal moment of all three of them meeting on that rooftop in No Way Home after the devastating events of Aunt May and such. So, yes, there's an awful lot of nostalgic ties to these three characters, to these three different Peter Parkers and their respective Marvel Legends. But I need, as a reviewer, as a critic, and as a content creator, I need to remain objective and say that there's still an awful lot left to be desired, especially after the amount of time that some of us did in fact end up waiting on after passing up on that 3-pack, retaining our scruples, making sure that we're not being hypocritical and saying it's too much and then becoming part of the problem. Here, we did think that we were saving a little bit of money, but I still feel kind of guilty that I may have contributed to that problem. A problem that didn't really do much in the way of convincing me to stay out of retirement for Marvel Legends. In fact, if anything, I'm probably going to be going back into retirement, not really look at any further Marvel Legends apart from Doc Ock, because obviously he was pre-ordered along with the remainder of these. But outside of that, yeah, I really do think that this is kind of it for me as far as Marvel Legends. And feel free to put me to task should you see something pop up on the channel. But quite frankly, I stuck with my guns as far as that original 3-pack that was a Hasbro Pulse exclusive. I haven't really bought any other Marvel Legends. I really can't think of any. I think the last one that I bought was literally just a gift from my girlfriend because she loves Wanda from, WandaVision, from Scarlet Witch. But aside from that, for myself, as far as like my personal addition, to the collection, nothing else has really transpired apart from this 6-pack wave of the new No Way Home figures, Green Goblin, and then Doc Ock, which is still yet to be released. If I was to go about a rating like I did with Green Goblin, I would say that Toby is probably going to be getting a 7 out of 10. Tom is probably going to be getting a 5 out of 10 because I genuinely do feel like I'm handling a aftermarket kind of bootleg figure in my hand. I'm really quite sorry, but that's just really how I feel. And like I said, in a very surprising turn, Andrew will probably get a very modest 8 out of 10, considering that the articulation was solid just right out of the box, almost on that merit alone. But the detail and that immaculate head sculpt personally ranks it as my favorite amongst these three. But regardless of which one fared better or worse, as a big picture sort of package deal, they really don't do much in the way of convincing me that maybe Ace Age Figuarts, despite being a whole lot more expensive, may be the better route for not only accurate figures, but ones that come with abundance of accessories and just a better overall package for what you're getting and what you're really paying. Which reminds me, I think I know which video to make next.